July 11, 2015. One of the largest and most secure federal penitentiaries, located 56 miles from Mexico City, the capital of Mexico. The prison features walls up to a meter thick, restricted airspace, and limited cell phone coverage within a 6-mile radius. Outside, the prison has several manned watchtowers and fences lined with barbed wire. Inside is a network of surveillance cameras monitoring the hallways and each individual cell. In addition, a series of electric double doors leading to the block of prison cells, all designed to prevent prison escapes and unauthorized communication. The prison is home to the most notorious criminals in Mexico. Inside cell number 20, inmate 3870 sits silently in solitary confinement on his steel bed, dressed in his prison-issued khakis. His face is unreadable, but his mind is racing. On the outside, he wields immense power and influence and is wealthy beyond imagination. 14 years ago, in 2001, he pulled off a successful prison escape from another federal penitentiary. After a long pause, he rises and strolls casually toward the shower tucked behind a privacy wall, the single blind spot in the cell. To the guards monitoring the cameras, it's nothing unusual. Close to the prison is an unfinished house, undergoing seemingly never-ending construction. Parked outside the house is an ATV. Back at the prison. 5 minutes go by, 10, then 20. Inmate 3870 never re-emerges from the shower. It would take 40 minutes from his disappearance for prison officials to notice he is missing. Confusion turns to alarm. A search begins, but he is gone. Later, investigators uncover the unimaginable. Hidden behind the shower wall is a 20 by 20 inch hole, barely wide enough to fit a suitcase, leading to a tunnel that stretches more than a mile beneath the prison. The man who vanished that night is Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, the world's most notorious drug lord at the time. How did he pull it off? What drove him to attempt such a daring gamble? This is the story of a farm boy who clawed his way to the top of a deadly cartel, defied captivity, and faced the crushing weight of his ultimate downfall. To fully understand what kind of man would orchestrate such an elaborate prison break, it's worth turning the hands back in time, to his early life. El Chapo was born in the rural town of Badiraguato, located in Sinaloa State, Mexico, a small community where most people, including his parents, earned a living through farming. His childhood was marked by hardship, as his family was extremely poor. His parents were cattle ranchers by trade. However, to make ends meet, they pivoted into the illegal drug trade, growing opium poppies, the raw material for heroin production. El Chapo and his siblings often suffered domestic violence at the hand of their father, while their mother helplessly looked on, fearing for her own safety. This extremely violent environment eventually led to El Chapo leaving his home at the tender age of 15 to go out into the world and fend for himself. He dropped out of school in the 3rd grade, leaving him barely able to read and write. Despite this, he had one thing going for him. He was ambitious and industrious, and as a result, he followed his father's footsteps into the drug world. He started out by growing marijuana for small amounts of cash. In his mind, illegal drug trade was his one and only way out of poverty. He worked under the tutelage of his uncle, Pedro Aviles Perez, a first-generation Mexican narco. Perez was one of the original drug entrepreneurs who flooded the US with Mexican marijuana in the late 1960s and early 1970s. It was here, in the marijuana and poppy fields of the Sierra Madre Mountains, that El Chapo began his transformation from a poor, ambitious boy into the biggest drug lord in the history of Mexico. El Chapo eventually set his sights on a more lucrative drug, cocaine. For a time, he and his uncle thrived, making a fortune as their operations expanded. But their success came to a brutal end when law enforcement raided one of their hideouts. In the ensuing gunfight, his uncle was killed. Now in his early 20s and without his mentor, El Chapo aligned himself with Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, the feared godfather of the Mexican drug world and founder of the Guadalajara Cartel. El Chapo quickly proved invaluable, managing logistics for the kingpin and serving as a ruthless problem solver, eliminating anyone who threatened the operation. The Guadalajara cartel's dominance was once unrivaled, but its empire soon began to fall apart. After the 1985 abduction and brutal murder of American DEA agent Enrique "Kiki" Camarena, an operation masterminded by Miguel and his co-founder, Rafael Caro Quintero. The killing provoked a furious response from the United States, which unleashed the full weight of its resources to hunt them down. By 1989, both men had been captured, marking the beginning of the cartel's downfall. Before his arrest, Miguel divided his empire among his most trusted lieutenants. That decision fractured the once mighty federation and created a dangerous power vacuum. In 1989, El Chapo inherited control of the Sinaloa corridor, laying the foundation for what would become the Sinaloa Cartel. The timing was perfect. Both the Medellin and Cali cartels of Colombia were in decline, their dominance slipping away. Opportunistic and enterprising, El Chapo recognized the void and moved swiftly to exploit it. When the Colombians subcontracted him to move their cocaine through Mexico, he refused cash payments. Instead, he struck a far bolder deal. For every 500 kilos he smuggled, he kept 200 for himself. The Colombians had no choice but to agree to his terms. This clever arrangement gave El Chapo his own steady supply of cocaine, transforming him from middleman to competitor, and eventually to the man who would control the drug trade from South America all the way into the US. By the early 90s, the Sinaloa Cartel had risen to become the most powerful drug trafficking organization in Mexico, putting El Chapo squarely in the crosshairs of both Mexican authorities and US law enforcement agencies, including the DEA and the FBI. Under his command, the Sinaloa Cartel trafficked cocaine, heroin, marijuana, and methamphetamine into the United States and far beyond. But what truly drew the relentless attention of law enforcement was the brutal war he ignited against the rival Tijuana cartel, run by the Arellano Felix brothers. The conflict spilled into the streets in a wave of killings, ambushes, and assassination attempts that turned entire cities into battlegrounds. The violence was too public, too bloody, and too frequent for the Mexican government to ignore any longer. For the first time, El Chapo's empire was under direct siege. The tipping point came on May 24, 1993, at Guadalajara International Airport, when hitmen from the Tijuana cartel were tipped off of El Chapo's presence. The assailants ambushed and fired upon a white Mercury Grand Marquis, in which they believed El Chapo was a passenger. However, the occupant of the car turned out to be Cardinal Juan Jesus Posadas Ocampo, the Archbishop of Guadalajara. The Cardinal and 6 others lost their lives that day. El Chapo, who was indeed present at the airport, managed to escape during the chaos that ensued. The government, led by President Carlos Salinas de Gortari, placed a $5 million bounty on the main suspects, including El Chapo, setting the stage for a widespread manhunt. With the feds closing in, El Chapo vanished into hiding. Before disappearing, he secured millions to ensure his family would be taken care of if he were captured. He also set aside funds, a combined sum of $400 million, to guarantee the Sinaloa cartel's operations would continue seamlessly in his absence. His escape route led him south, across the border into Guatemala. To guarantee his safety, he paid a $1.2 million bribe to a high-ranking Guatemalan military official, buying what he thought was protection. But the official would later betray him, turning El Chapo over to the authorities. On June 9, 1993, Guatemalan troops located him at a hotel on the Guatemala-Mexico border and apprehended him without incident. Shortly after his capture, he was placed on a military plane and extradited back to Mexico, where he was held at the Puente Grande detention center, a maximum security prison. After his arrest, as he was being interviewed on camera, El Chapo tried to downplay his image, telling reporters he was nothing more than a simple farmer. But the truth was far from simple. Sentenced to 20 years, El Chapo quickly transformed life inside Puente Grande into his own personal kingdom. Most of the staff were on his payroll, guards bent to his will, granting him family visits whenever he wished. From behind bars, he held meetings with business associates, phoned judges and politicians, and kept the Sinaloa Cartel running as if prison walls didn't exist. When the weight of business bored him, he arranged for prostitutes to be smuggled in for conjugal visits. It later emerged that his influence stretched even further. Some accounts claimed he had corrupt DEA agents on his payroll, leveraging them to target his rivals. Puente Grande was meant to cage him. Instead, it became his palace. For a time, El Chapo lived as though he had not a care in the world. However, his comfort wouldn't last forever. After years of shielding its citizens, the Mexican Supreme Court issued a ruling that allowed the extradition of Mexican nationals to the United States. For El Chapo, this was a nightmare. He knew he had been indicted in the US on charges of money laundering and trafficking massive quantities of cocaine. Unlike in Mexico, where bribery had bought him near limitless freedom, he understood that US authorities could not be swayed so easily. Extradition meant losing the luxuries, influence, and power he enjoyed behind bars. So, after 8 years of incarceration, El Chapo made his decision. He would not wait to be handed over. He would escape. There were two competing accounts of how El Chapo pulled off the escape from Puente Grande. The first claims that a prison guard quietly unlocked his cell door, slipped him into a laundry cart stuffed with dirty clothes, and wheeled him past every checkpoint to the prison parking lot. From there, El Chapo climbed into the trunk of a waiting car and vanished. But investigative journalist Annabel Hernandez uncovered a far more brazen version. That El Chapo simply walked out of Puente Grande's front door, disguised in a police uniform, escorted by guards who were already on his payroll. Whichever account is true, one fact remains. His freedom came at a staggering price. Reports suggest the escape cost him $2.5 million in bribes. And if Hernandez's version is accurate, it exposed corruption on a scale so vast, it shook the entire Mexican prison system. For El Chapo, though, the outcome was clear. His escape restored his freedom and also elevated his legend. From that moment on, he wasn't just another drug lord. He was the untouchable one. After his escape, El Chapo wasted no time consolidating power. With rivals weakened and corruption greasing every step, he expanded the Sinaloa Cartel into a global empire, amassing more wealth and influence than ever before. His name became synonymous with fear, violence, and untouchable power. For over a decade, he remained at large, a ghost authorities could never quite pin down. 13 years passed before his luck ran out. On February 21st, 2014, Mexican authorities stormed a seaside hotel in the resort town of Mazatlan and captured the world's most wanted drug lord. This time, authorities swore there would be no mistakes. El Chapo was locked away inside Altiplano prison. President Nieto even declared that it would be unforgivable if El Chapo escaped again. But those words, spoken with such confidence, would soon come back to haunt him. After his recapture, El Chapo once again faced the looming threat of extradition, but this time, it was more real than ever. In June 2015, the United States government formally filed its request to have him handed over. The clock was ticking, and El Chapo knew it. If he was sent north, there would be no bribes, no luxuries, no control. Only a cold cell and ironclad security. His escape became a necessity, and it had to happen fast, but pulling it off would be anything but easy. The initial plan was communicated through El Chapo's wife, Emma Coronel, during a prison visit. El Chapo instructed her to contact Damaso Lopez Nunez, a former deputy director of security at the prison he'd escaped in 2001. Through his connections, Nunez was instrumental in securing the Altiplano prison blueprints. Along with Nunez, El Chapo's 4 sons oversaw the preparations for the prison escape. Remember that house? The one that seemed to be in a constant state of construction? It wasn't. It was a ruse. The property had been purchased solely for its strategic location, sitting just close enough to Altiplano to serve its true purpose. Beneath its walls and scaffolding, a massive excavation was taking place, one that would stretch directly under the prison itself. To make the escape a reality, El Chapo went to extraordinary lengths. His men were secretly sent to Germany, where they trained under professional engineers in the art of underground tunneling. There, they mastered techniques for digging undetected, reinforcing walls, and preventing tunnel collapses. Armed with this knowledge, they deployed cutting-edge technology, a high-tech laser mapping system that could chart the tunnel's course with astonishing precision. The margin of error was less than half an inch, a critical detail when the target lay a full mile away, buried beneath the fortress-like walls of Altiplano prison. To make sure the tunnel hit the surface in the exact blind spot at the location of the shower, El Chapo's wife, Emma, smuggled a watch with a GPS tracker hidden inside. By placing the watch in the shower corner, El Chapo gave his team the exact coordinates needed to guide the final stage of the dig. At completion, the tunnel was 1 mile long, 5.5 feet high, and 2.5 feet wide enough for a grown adult to walk through it. It was equipped with over 300 specialized bulbs to provide lighting, powered by a generator hidden in a barbecue pit located at the fake house. The tunnel also featured a complete ventilation system using PVC pipes and a rail system. Additionally, a small motorcycle was adapted to run on the rail system, which was used to transport excavated dirt. For several days leading up to the escape, inmates and guards heard loud drilling and banging noises. Many inmates complained about the noise, but the complaints went ignored. On the evening of July 11, 2015, the plan was set in action. When El Chapo stepped behind the privacy wall, he climbed down the opening right underneath his shower. Using a 30-foot ladder, he descended into the tunnel. His brother-in-law was waiting for him on the modified motorcycle, on which they both rode all the way to the half-constructed house. Once at the house, El Chapo got onto the already waiting ATV and started his journey to an 18-wheeler semi-truck. After a 2-hour drive at the back of the truck, he arrived at a remote airstrip in San Juan, where 2 private planes were waiting. One was a decoy, and he would board the other. Once on board, he was flown to his hideout in the mountains of Sinaloa. It reportedly took prison guards 40 minutes to react and confirm that El Chapo was missing, and by then, it was already too late. The escape was a massive embarrassment for the Mexican government. Authorities declared states of emergency in nearby areas, shut down the closest international airport in Toluca, and set up roadblocks across Mexico State, with heavily armed police stopping vehicles. This marked the beginning of a nationwide manhunt, codenamed Operation Black Swan. The United States government had pushed for El Chapo's extradition because they didn't trust that a Mexican prison could contain him. They were right. The US offered unconditional support, including drones and intelligence teams to aid in his recapture, but Mexico initially declined the offer. From the outset, there was widespread suspicion that the escape was an inside job. The investigations focused on the security lapses and probable corruption within the prison system. Approximately 30 to 34 prison employees were detained for interrogation. 7 officials, including 2 of Mexico's Secret Service, were formally charged and arrested. The prison warden at the time and other directors were fired, and the escape was a profound humiliation for President Nieto. The Attorney General at the time, who had previously dismissed the risk of escape, was also replaced. After the flawless execution of his tunnel escape, El Chapo began to believe his own legend. His ego swelled, and his hunger for recognition grew dangerous. He taunted his enemies, even going so far as to threaten Donald Trump, then a US presidential candidate. But the greatest risk came from his obsession with legacy. El Chapo wanted to be immortalized. Driven by that desire, he pursued a long-held dream, a movie about his life. Through his lawyers, he reached out to Mexican actress Kate del Castillo, who admired his story. She became the bridge that connected him to Hollywood, introducing him to American actor and movie director Sean Penn. Against all odds, El Chapo agreed to a clandestine meeting with the two at his remote mountain hideout. But this brush with Hollywood would prove to be his undoing. Unbeknownst to him, Mexican authorities were already monitoring the actor's correspondence and movements. The moment the meeting took place, El Chapo's myth collided with reality, and shortly after the meeting, the trap closed in. Authorities raided the hideout. After intense fire exchange between the authorities and El Chapo's men, El Chapo managed to get away, but this time, the authorities stayed hot on his trail. They continued to track El Chapo's communications, which eventually led them to a safe house in the coastal city of Los Mochis, Sinaloa. And on January 8, 2016, the Mexican authorities raided the safe house. Once again, while El Chapo's men engaged in a gunfight with the authorities, El Chapo and his chief assassin, El Cholo Ivan, slipped into a tunnel hidden behind a mirror. They emerged a short distance away and stole a vehicle at gunpoint. However, law enforcement had been alerted to the vehicle's number plate and quickly stopped them. El Chapo offered the officers bribes, but that didn't work this time. When they refused, he threatened their lives, letting them know his men were on the way and that they were going to kill the officers. Indeed, law enforcement got word that El Chapo's goons were on the way to them, so they hid El Chapo inside a nearby motel. Eventually, the Marines arrived at the motel and took El Chapo into custody. Following his recapture, this time, the process to extradite him to the US started immediately. However, it was not as straightforward as one would think. In October 2016, Vincent Bermudez Zacharias, the Mexican federal judge presiding over El Chapo's extradition case, was assassinated while jogging near his home, an attempt at intimidation. Despite this, the extradition process progressed. On January 19, 2017, El Chapo was extradited to the United States, where he arrived on US soil to significant media attention. His trial began in November 2018 and included testimony from 56 witnesses, including 14 former high-ranking cartel members. On February 12, 2019, El Chapo was found guilty on all 10 counts against him, and on July 17, 2019, he was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. On top of that, he was ordered to pay $12.6 billion in restitution. Today, he is currently serving his sentence at ADX Florence in Colorado, the nation's most secure supermax prison, under conditions described in his own words as a fate worse than death.